The Grand Hall of the Galactic Accord seemed to pulse with anxiety. Its crystalline dome, designed to accommodate the atmospheric needs of 273 different species, shimmering with an iridescence that betrayed the tension within. For 12,000 years, this ancient institution had maintained a delicate interstellar peace, weathering cosmic storms, civil wars, and even the occasional dimensional incursion. But today, the Hall faced its greatest existential threat since the quantum schism of the 9th millennium. The Seldorans were gone. High Chancellor Omox, whose amorphous form rippled with distress patterns, addressed the assembly from the central podium. His translator device converted his biochemical emissions into the standardized diplomatic frequency. Representatives of the Accord, we face unprecedented circumstances. The Guardian species has self-terminated. A wave of biochemical signatures, the equivalent of gasps and murmurs, swept through the chamber. For many species present, the concept was incomprehensible. The Seldorans had been the cornerstone of galactic stability since the Accord's founding, their unmatched logical processing and immunity to corruption, making them ideal arbiters of interstellar disputes. The preliminary reports indicate the Seldoran civil conflict was triggered by a philosophical paradox regarding the optimal application of their own moral framework, continued Omox, his translucent membranes pulsing rapidly. What began as an academic debate escalated to violence when both factions concluded the other's interpretation posed an existential risk to their core values. From their observation platform near the back of the hall, 3 human diplomats exchanged glances. They represented Earth's first official delegation to the Accord, having only been granted observer status 8 standard months prior. Humanity, still recovering from its own near-extinction events and only a century into its interstellar presence, was considered by most Accord species to be perilously unstable, technologically haphazard, and diplomatically naive. "How does an entire species commit suicide over a philosophical disagreement?" whispered Marina Chenwu, the junior diplomatic attaché, her eyes wide with disbelief. At 34, she was the youngest of the 3, specializing in xenopsychology with a focus on collective intelligence structures. "Logical species. Logical conclusion," murmured Ambassador Elijah Okonkwo, the senior diplomat at 57. "If your entire identity is built on perfect reasoning, and you encounter an irreconcilable flaw in that reasoning." They called it existential incompatibility syndrome, added Dr. Sanjay Mehta, the mission's xenobiologist. Their neural architecture literally couldn't sustain contradictory moral conclusions. The chamber's acoustics carried High Chancellor Omox's next words with perfect clarity. "Without the Seldorans to maintain balance, we face the potential collapse of our 12-millennium peace accord. The Guardian species' role must be filled, or we risk regression to the pre-accord chaos era." Ambassador Zixnathi of the Valerian Confederacy rose on her 4 primary appendages. The crystalline growths that served as her sensory organs glinted as she addressed the chamber. "The Guardian species cannot be replaced on a whim," she declared, her translator rendering her subsonic vibrations into standard frequency. The Seldorans were uniquely suited through both evolution and cultural development to provide impartial oversight. They spent 4,000 years in preparation before assuming the role. Representative Tulk of the Hive Concordance buzzed in agreement, the collective consciousness of 18 billion insectoids speaking through their singular ambassador. "The Hive Concordance concurs. Hasty replacement risks destabilizing the very foundations of our interstellar community." Across the hall, arguments erupted. Some delegates advocated for a ruling council of the oldest species. Others proposed advanced artificial intelligence systems. A faction of energy-based entities suggested a return to regional autonomy. With each passing moment, the chamber's unity fractured further, exactly as many had feared would happen without the Seldorans' steadying influence. Marina turned to Ambassador Okonkwo. "Sir, I think we should speak. Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. We're observers, Marina. We have no standing to address the assembly. But we have a unique perspective, she insisted. And maybe that's what they need right now. Dr. Mehta nodded slowly. She's right, Elijah. The humans in this room may be the only representatives who truly understand what it means to face extinction and survive it. Ambassador Okonkwo considered this for a long moment, his eyes tracking the increasing chaos on the chamber floor. Finally, he nodded and activated their platform's request beacon. The soft chime of their signal went unnoticed amid the growing discord until High Chancellor Omox, perhaps desperate for any interruption to the deteriorating proceedings, acknowledged them. The Accord recognizes Earth Observer Platform 7, Omox announced, his biochemical signatures displaying what their human observers had learned to interpret as surprise, tinged with resignation. A sudden hush fell over the chamber as Ambassador Okonkwo rose and approached the central speaker's podium. Many delegates turned their various sensory organs toward the human, with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Accord, began Okonkwo, his deep voice steady despite the scrutiny. Humanity acknowledges we are newcomers to your ancient and honorable institution. We have observed these proceedings with humility and respect for the 12 millennia of peace you have maintained. He paused, making deliberate eye contact with several of the more influential delegates. But perhaps our very newness offers a perspective that may be valuable in this unprecedented crisis. Humanity volunteers to serve as the next guardian species of the Galactic Accord. The chamber erupted. Some delegates emitted warning pheromones. Others vibrated with frequencies of alarm, and still others initiated emergency communication protocols with their homeworlds. High Chancellor Omox's form rippled so violently that his translator momentarily failed. Ambassador Zixnathi was the first to regain composure. This is preposterous, she declared. Humanity has barely mastered controlled fusion. Your species was still communicating exclusively through atmospheric vibration patterns when the previous Guardian Selection Conclave convened. The Hive Concordance rejects this proposal categorically, buzzed Representative Chulk. Humans are categorized as an unpredictable variable species. Your evolutionary psychology includes tribal aggression, emotional decision-making, and high individual variance. These are precisely the characteristics the guardian species must not possess. Other objections followed rapidly. The Quantum Collective cited humanity's biological limitations. The Gaseous Alliance questioned Earth's political stability. The Photonic Assembly expressed concerns about human lifespan limitations. Ambassador Okonkwo waited patiently for the initial wave of objections to subside before continuing. Representatives of the Accord, I acknowledge your concerns. They are valid, reasoned, and entirely expected. Humanity does not possess the perfect logical consistency of the Seldorans. We are not immortal. Our history includes conflict, irrationality, and mistakes that would horrify many of your species. He stepped away from the podium and began to walk slowly around the central platform, a move that, while unorthodox, allowed him to address more of the chamber directly. But consider this. What destroyed the Seldorans? Perfect logical consistency. They encountered a paradox they could not resolve, and their very perfection became their downfall. Marina and Dr. Mehta had joined him on the platform now, forming a triangle that allowed them to face different sections of the chamber simultaneously. Humanity proposes, continued Marina, picking up the thread, that the very qualities you consider our weaknesses may be our strengths in this role. We are adaptable precisely because we are imperfect. We question our own assumptions. We change our minds. We make mistakes and learn from them. Dr. Mehta added, Our species has survived 5 near-extinction events in our recorded history. We have endured climate catastrophe, nuclear conflict, pandemic disease, artificial intelligence alignment crises, and resource depletion. Each time, we have adapted and emerged stronger, not because we found perfect solutions, but because we found workable compromises. Ambassador Okonkwo returned to the central podium. The guardian species role requires not perfection, but resilience, not consistency, but adaptability, not immortality, but the wisdom to pass knowledge between generations. Humanity offers not a perfect guardian, but a learning one. A moment of silence followed the statement, broken only by the subtle background hum of the hall's environmental systems, adjusting to the increased biological activity. Then, from one of the upper tiers, a new voice entered the discussion. It belonged to Elder Lyrax of the Traxian Remnant, one of the oldest living beings in the known galaxy, and a survivor of the pre-Accord Chaos era. "The human delegation makes an interesting case," rumbled Elder Lyrax, each word emerging slowly from his ancient vocal apparatus. During the formation of the Accord, many argued against selecting the Seldorans as guardians. Their logical perfection was seen as a liability by some. Those concerns, it seems, were not without merit. The chamber listened respectfully to the elder, whose species had once ruled 1,000 systems before nearly destroying themselves in a war of philosophical purity, not unlike the Seldorans' end. "However," continued Lyrax, "the proposal before us carries even greater risks. Humans are not merely imperfect. They are chaotic, emotional, and have demonstrated repeatedly that they will violate their own established ethical frameworks when sufficiently motivated by fear, greed, or tribal loyalty." Ambassador Zixnathi seized on this opening. "Precisely. The historical records from Earth's own archives document multiple instances of genocide, ecocide, and systemic oppression. Even within the last century, Earth has experienced 3 limited nuclear exchanges and an artificial intelligence containment failure that nearly resulted in planetary sterilization." "With respect, Ambassador," countered Marina, "those very crises helped us develop the synthetic intelligence ethics framework that many Accord species have since adopted. Our mistakes became your safeguards." The debate continued for hours, with the human delegation responding to increasingly specific objections about Earth's history, biology, and cultural development. As the standard cycle progressed, the tone of the discussion gradually shifted from outright rejection to skeptical inquiry. It was Dr. Mehta who introduced what would become the turning point. During a brief recess, he had accessed the Accord's historical archives and discovered something that even many of the delegates seemed to have forgotten. "Esteemed representatives," he began, after the session reconvened, "I have been reviewing the original Guardian species selection criteria from the Accord's founding. According to these documents, the Seldorans were not selected solely for their logical consistency or their ethical perfection." He projected the relevant text into the chamber's shared perception field. "The primary criterion was, and I quote, the capacity to mediate between fundamentally incompatible perspective frameworks without imposing universal standardization. The Seldorans excelled at this because they could comprehend any logical system from within its own parameters." Dr. Mehta paused to let this sink in before continuing. "Humanity possesses a different but equally valuable version of this skill. We call it empathy, the ability to understand another's perspective even when we do not share it. Our art, literature, and philosophy are built on this foundation. We have spent millennia trying to understand ourselves precisely because we are not uniform in our thinking." This reframing of the discussion opened new avenues of debate. Species that had been categorically opposed began to engage more constructively. Questions shifted from "why should humans be trusted?" to "how would human guardianship differ from Seldoran oversight?" As the human delegation explained their vision for a more collaborative, adaptive approach to interstellar peacekeeping, skepticism remained, but was increasingly tempered with curiosity. The Accord had operated under Seldoran principles for so long that the possibility of a fundamentally different approach, while frightening, also offered new possibilities. Then, 4 standard hours into the emergency session, the chamber's security protocols activated. The environmental system shifted to crisis configuration as High Chancellor Omox received an urgent communication. "Representatives of the Accord," announced Omox, his form now rigid with alarm patterns. "Our long-range detection arrays have identified a Vorath battle fleet approaching Accord space. Current trajectory indicates they will reach this station in approximately 6 standard hours." The chamber descended into chaos. The Vorath, a highly aggressive, expansion-oriented species from the galactic rim, had been kept at bay for millennia through a combination of Seldoran diplomatic maneuvering and the unified defensive capabilities of the Accord. With the Seldorans gone and the Accord in disarray, they had apparently decided to test the new power dynamics. "This is precisely why humans cannot be guardians," exclaimed Ambassador Zixnathi. "We are facing an immediate security crisis that requires perfect coordination and established protocols." "On the contrary," replied Ambassador Okonkwo, his voice cutting through the panic. "This is exactly why humanity should assume the guardian role immediately. We specialize in crisis response." "What do you propose?" demanded High Chancellor Omox. "Give us temporary authority to coordinate a response," said Okonkwo. "If we succeed, consider it our application demonstration. If we fail, well, the question of long-term guardianship will be moot anyway." Elder Lyrax's ancient voice rose above the commotion. "I have witnessed enough extinction events in my lifetime. I support the human proposal, provisionally." With the influential elder's support and no better options presenting themselves, the chamber approved emergency powers for the human delegation by a narrow margin. The countdown to the Vorath arrival began. Marina, Dr. Mehta, and Ambassador Okonkwo immediately withdrew to a strategic planning chamber, where they were joined by representatives from the Accord's Defense Committee and Communication Guild. "The Vorath operate on a strict dominance hierarchy," explained Marina, calling up everything the human intelligence services had gathered on the species. "They're testing us because they believe the Seldoran extinction has created a power vacuum." "Conventional defense won't work," added Dr. Mehta. "The Vorath fleet outguns our combined forces 3-1, according to these estimates. And without Seldoran coordination, our tactical efficiency drops by at least 40%. Ambassador Okonkwo studied the holographic display of the approaching fleet. "Then, we don't fight conventionally. The Seldorans maintained peace through perfect logical argumentation. We'll try something different." "What do you propose?" asked the Photonic Assembly's representative, a being of pure energy contained within a specialized field generator. "Communication," said Okonkwo, "but not as the Accord has practiced it before." The next 5 hours saw a flurry of activity as the human delegation worked with Accord specialists to develop what they called a cultural translation interface. Unlike standard diplomatic translators that simply converted languages, this system was designed to reframe concepts across radically different cognitive architectures. The Vorath, they explained, operated on a logic of absolute dominance and submission. Their language had no concept for mutual benefit or collaborative advantage. The Seldorans had maintained peace with them by constructing elaborate logical proofs that demonstrated the mathematical inefficiency of conflict. But with the Seldorans gone, those arguments have lost their force, explained Marina. We need a new approach that speaks to the Vorath worldview while changing its fundamental assumptions. As the deadline approached, tension in the Grand Hall reached unprecedented levels. Many species had already evacuated their most essential personnel. Others prepared for what they believed would be the end of the 12 Millennium Peace. With just 30 minutes remaining before the Vorath fleet's arrival, the human delegation returned to the central chamber with their hastily constructed device. "The cultural translation interface is ready," announced Dr. Mehta. But I must emphasize that this is experimental technology combined with speculative xenopsychology. The outcome is uncertain. What exactly will it do? Asked High Chancellor Omox. It will communicate with the Vorath in their own cognitive framework, explained Marina. But instead of trying to convince them that aggression is illogical, as the Seldorans did, it will introduce what we call a productive paradox into their dominance-based reasoning. Before further questions could be asked, the station's sensors indicated that the Vorath fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. Their communication systems activated immediately, broadcasting their traditional challenge. "We are Vorath. You are weakened. Submit or be destroyed." Ambassador Okonkwo nodded to Dr. Mehta, who activated the interface. The device hummed to life, processing the Vorath communication and constructing its response according to the parameters the human team had programmed. The response it transmitted was incomprehensible to most of the Accord species, being tailored specifically to Vorath cognition, but its effect was immediately visible on the monitoring systems. The Vorath fleet, which had been advancing in attack formation, suddenly slowed. "What did you send them?" demanded Ambassador Zixnathi. "A paradox embedded in their own dominance hierarchy logic," explained Marina. "In simple terms, we propose that true dominance requires the capacity to choose not to dominate, that the highest form of strength is restraint." "That makes no sense in Vorath cognition," objected the Quantum Collective's representative. "Exactly," said Ambassador Okonkwo with a small smile. "And that's why it's working. The Vorath command structure is now caught in a processing loop, trying to determine if attacking would demonstrate strength or weakness, according to this new formulation." The chamber watched in tense silence as the Vorath fleet remained motionless at the system's edge. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still, they did not advance. Finally, a new communication arrived. "We will consider your paradox. Hostilities are suspended pending resolution." A wave of relief swept through the Grand Hall, though many remained skeptical that this unexpected reprieve would last. The human delegation, however, seemed unsurprised. "This is just the beginning," explained Dr. Mehta. "The paradox will propagate through their hierarchical communication systems, forcing a fundamental reassessment of their expansion philosophy. It won't change them overnight, but it buys us time to establish a new relationship framework." In the days that followed, the Accord witnessed something unprecedented in its 12,000-year history. An emerging dialogue with the Vorath that didn't rely on Seldoran logical proofs or threats of mutual destruction. The human delegation's productive paradox had created a space for new possibilities. 3 standard months after the emergency session, the Grand Hall of the Galactic Accord convened again, this time for a formal investiture ceremony. The chamber was filled to capacity, with representatives from all 273 member species in attendance. Even a small delegation from the Vorath Command Council was present, marking their first peaceful participation in Accord proceedings. High Chancellor Omox presided over the ceremony, his amorphous form displaying patterns of solemn dignity as he addressed the assembly. "Representatives of the Accord, we gather today to formalize a decision that would have seemed unthinkable mere months ago. The selection conclave has completed its deliberations and reached a consensus determination." A hush fell over the chamber as Omox continued. "In accordance with the founding principles of the Galactic Accord, and in recognition of their demonstrated capabilities, we hereby designate humanity as the new guardian species." Ambassador Okonkwo, Marina, and Dr. Mehta stood at the center of the chamber, their formal attire incorporating elements from dozens of Accord cultures, a deliberate symbol of their commitment to multi-species collaboration. Elder Lyrax approached them, bearing the Seldoran crystal, a symbolic artifact representing the guardian species' responsibilities. As he transferred it to Ambassador Okonkwo's hands, he spoke with unexpected warmth. "When you first proposed human guardianship, I believed it would lead to disaster. I now believe it may be our salvation, not because humans are perfect, but precisely because you are not." Ambassador Okonkwo accepted the crystal with a formal bow. "On behalf of humanity, we accept this responsibility with humility and determination. We will not be perfect guardians, but we will be persistent ones. We will make mistakes, but we pledge to learn from them. And when faced with challenges that seem insurmountable, we will do what humans have always done: adapt, innovate, and persevere." As the ceremony concluded and the various delegations began to disperse, Marina found herself approached by Ambassador Zixnathi, once their most vocal opponent. "I remain concerned about humanity's emotional volatility," admitted the Valerian, her crystalline sensory organs glinting. "But I am beginning to understand that perhaps the Accord has been too rigid in its thinking. The Seldorans maintained peace through perfect consistency. Perhaps humans will maintain it through perfect inconsistency." Marina smiled. "Not perfect inconsistency, Ambassador. Just perfect adaptability." In the observation lounge overlooking the vast expanse of space surrounding the Accord station, Dr. Mehta stood with Ambassador Okonkwo, watching distant stars. "Do you think we can really do this, Elijah?" asked Mehta quietly. "Maintain the peace for another 12,000 years?" Okonkwo considered the question carefully before responding. "I don't know, but I do know this. Humanity has survived its worst instincts and its greatest challenges because we never stop trying to be better than we are. That's something the Seldorans, for all their perfection, couldn't do." He turned to look at the bustling activity of the grand hall below them, where humans now worked alongside hundreds of alien species to rebuild what had almost been lost. The Seldorans failed because they couldn't evolve beyond their programming. We won't make that mistake. As the starlight illuminated the scene, the human guardian species began its work, not with certainty of success, but with the one quality that had defined humanity since its earliest days: hope in the face of impossible odds. And somewhere in the vast complexity of the universe, perhaps the ghosts of the Seldorans approved of their imperfect, emotional, chaotic successors. After all, it was a most logical solution to an illogical problem. The end. Wait, no, not the end, the beginning. The beginning of humanity's greatest challenge, and perhaps its greatest opportunity. As the newly designated guardian species of the Galactic Accord, the human delegation faced a daunting task. They were responsible for maintaining peace among 273 diverse species, each with their own unique biology, culture, and cognitive framework. The Seldorans had managed this feat for millennia through perfect logical consistency and impartiality. Humans would have to find their own path. The months following the investiture ceremony were a whirlwind of activity. The initial human delegation expanded to include specialists from every field: xenobiologists, quantum linguists, cultural anthropologists, conflict resolution experts, and even artists and philosophers. Their first task was to establish a new headquarters on the Accord Station, transforming the austere Seldoran chambers into spaces that facilitated what humans called creative problem-solving. The Seldorans designed this space for solitary contemplation. Marina explained to a group of puzzled Accord representatives as they toured the renovated Guardian headquarters. "We've redesigned it for collaborative engagement." The central chamber now featured a circular arrangement of adaptable interfaces, each calibrated to the sensory and cognitive preferences of different species. Where the Seldorans had relied on pure logic to bridge interspecies divides, the humans built physical and technological bridges instead. "Your approach is unusual," commented Representative Tulk of the Hive Concordance, whose compound eyes took in the redesigned space with evident confusion. "That's rather the point," replied Dr. Mehta with a smile. "The Seldorans excelled at finding the single perfect solution to each problem. We excel at finding multiple imperfect solutions and combining them in unexpected ways. This philosophy was put to the test almost immediately. A territorial dispute between the methane-breathing Gorsians and the silicon-based lithoids threatened to escalate into open conflict. Under Seldoran guardianship, such disputes had been resolved through the application of objective resource allocation algorithms that were mathematically perfect, but often left both parties feeling unsatisfied. Ambassador Okonkwo took a different approach. Instead of imposing a solution, he invited representatives from both species to Earth for what he called a cultural immersion experience. "You want us to visit your toxic oxygen world?" exclaimed the Gorsian delegate, methane bubbling through his speech sacs in patterns of alarm. "With appropriate environmental accommodations, yes," confirmed Okonkwo. "Before we discuss territory division, I believe it would be valuable for you to understand how humans have approached similar challenges throughout our history." Skeptical, but intrigued, the delegates agreed. What followed was a 2-week tour of Earth's most notorious former conflict zones: the Korean Peninsula, the Middle East, the Amazon Basin. In each location, the alien visitors were shown both the historical conflicts over resources and the eventual compromises or innovations that had resolved them. "Humans fought wars over these territories for centuries," explained Marina, as they toured a former demilitarized zone, now transformed into a thriving ecological preserve. What ultimately brought peace wasn't perfect resource allocation, but creative reimagining of the resources themselves. By the end of the tour, the Gorsian and Lithoid delegates had begun to see their dispute differently. Working with the human guardians, they developed a rotating territorial management system that allowed both species to access the contested region during the seasonal cycles most advantageous to their respective biologies. More importantly, they initiated a joint research program to develop synthetic alternatives to the rare minerals both species required. "This solution is inefficient by Seldoran standards," noted Ambassador Zixnathi, who had been observing the process with interest. "It requires ongoing cooperation rather than a single permanent resolution." "Exactly," replied Ambassador Okonkwo. "And therein lies its strength. The arrangement must be actively maintained through continuous dialogue. Peace becomes a process, not a state." This approach, what came to be known as Dynamic Resolution Protocol, became the hallmark of human guardianship. Rather than imposing static solutions through superior logical reasoning, the human delegation facilitated processes through which species could develop their own evolving arrangements. Sometimes these arrangements were messy. Occasionally, they required adjustments. But they possessed a resilience that the Seldorans' perfect solutions had lacked. Not everyone appreciated this new methodology. A faction of accord species, primarily those with highly ordered cognitive structures, formed what they called the Stability Consortium. Led by the Quantum Collective, they argued that human guardianship introduced dangerous unpredictability into interstellar relations. "The Seldoran system provided certainty," declared the collective's primary node during a particularly heated accord session. Dispute resolution outcomes could be predicted with 99.8% accuracy. Under human guardianship, that predictability has decreased to 62.3%. "And yet," countered Dr. Mehta, "compliance with resolution agreements has increased from 84% to 91%. Fewer parties are circumventing or abandoning the arrangements once implemented." "Because they are simplified to accommodate emotional and cultural factors, rather than optimizing resource distribution," objected the collective. "Precisely," agreed Mehta calmly. "They work better because they account for more variables, not fewer." This philosophical division within the Accord might have deepened into a problematic rift, if not for an unexpected development 6 standard months into human guardianship. The Vorath, whose aggressive expansion had been held in check for millennia by Seldoran logical containment, requested formal admission to the Galactic Accord. The announcement sent shockwaves through the interstellar community. The Vorath had never shown interest in peaceful cooperation. Their entire civilization built around a philosophy of conquest and dominance. Many suspected a trap or infiltration strategy. "This is precisely the kind of unpredictable destabilization we warned about," declared the Stability Consortium. "Human guardianship has disrupted established power dynamics to a dangerous degree." But Marina, who had been maintaining communication with the Vorath since the productive paradox incident, saw something different occurring. "The paradox we introduced has propagated through their cultural consciousness," she explained to the Accord Council. "It's triggered what we might call a philosophical revolution. A species that defines strength solely through dominance is now exploring a more complex definition that includes restraint, cooperation, and mutual benefit." "That is not possible," insisted Ambassador Zixnathi. "Vorath neural architecture is hardwired for hierarchical thinking. They cannot simply choose to reinterpret their foundational drives." "With respect, Ambassador," replied Marina, "that's precisely what humans have been doing throughout our history. Our neural architecture predisposes us towards certain behaviors too: tribalism, aggression, fear of the other. Yet we've built civilizations based on cooperation, empathy, and inclusion. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but persistently. After extensive debate and extraordinary security precautions, the Accord agreed to host a formal delegation from the Vorath Command Council. What followed was the most challenging diplomatic engagement of the human guardianship thus far. The Vorath delegates, massive armored beings with multiple sensory appendages and intimidating biological weaponry, arrived at the Accord station with a proposal that defied all expectations. They requested not just membership but a collaborative security arrangement that would transform their battle fleets into a joint defense force for the Accord's outer territories. "We have determined that true dominance in the galactic context cannot be achieved through conquest," explained Supreme Commander Xorth, his translator rendering his subsonic vibrations into standard frequency. "The paradox your species introduced has led us to a new understanding. Protection of the weak demonstrates greater strength than their subjugation." Many Accord representatives remain deeply skeptical, interpreting this as merely a sophisticated infiltration strategy. The human guardians, however, saw an opportunity. "We propose a phased integration program," Ambassador Okonkwo suggested to the Council, "beginning with joint scientific expeditions to neutral space, followed by collaborative response to natural disasters, and eventually moving toward limited security operations." "This is unprecedented," objected High Chancellor Omox. "No species has transitioned from threat to ally so rapidly." "Unprecedented? Yes," agreed Okonkwo. "Impossible, no. Humans have managed similar transitions throughout our history." The debate continued for weeks, with the human delegation working tirelessly to build support for what they called the Vorath Integration Initiative. They faced resistance not only from the Stability Consortium, but also from species with historical grievances against Vorath aggression. Yet slowly, carefully, they built a coalition of support. The turning point came unexpectedly, during what should have been a routine scientific presentation. A research vessel from the Photonic Assembly had been monitoring unusual quantum fluctuations in a remote sector when it detected something alarming: a dimensional rift similar to those that had nearly destroyed the Accord during the quantum schism millennia ago. "Our analysis indicates the rift is expanding at an exponential rate," reported the photonic researcher, their energy form flickering with distress patterns. "Current models project catastrophic dimensional overlap within 2 standard years." The Grand Hall erupted in panic. The quantum schism was not just a historical event, but a foundational trauma in the collective memory of the Accord. Many of the oldest species had lost entire worlds to the interdimensional incursion. As the Council struggled to process this existential threat, Supreme Commander Xorth of the Vorath delegation rose to address the Assembly. The Vorath Empire possesses technology that may be relevant to this situation, he announced. Our quantum barrier generators were developed to protect our territories from similar phenomena on the galactic rim. A hush fell over the chamber as the implications of this statement registered. The Vorath, long considered a threat, potentially held the key to the Accord's survival. Ambassador Okonkwo seized the moment. This is an opportunity to demonstrate the new paradigm we've been advocating. Not perfect solutions imposed from above, but collaborative problem-solving drawing on the unique strengths of diverse species. What followed was unprecedented in Accord history. A joint scientific and military task force comprising humans, Vorath, and representatives from 20 other species, all working together to address the dimensional rift crisis. The human guardians coordinated but did not command, creating space for expertise from all participants to contribute. The Vorath quantum barrier technology proved promising, but insufficient on its own. The photonic assembly contributed advanced dimensional mapping capabilities. The Hive concordance offered biological computing systems that could process the enormous datasets involved. Human scientists suggested adaptive algorithms inspired by Earth's ecosystem resilience models. For 3 intensive months, the task force worked around the clock, developing what came to be called the Dimensional Stabilization Network, a system of interconnected quantum barrier generators that could be deployed around the expanding rift. The design incorporated technologies and principles from dozens of species, creating something entirely new. This would never have emerged under Seldoran guardianship, observed Elder Lyrax, as he reviewed the final implementation plans. Their approach would have identified the optimal existing technology and deployed it at maximum efficiency. But this hybrid solution is more than optimal. It's transformative. The deployment of the Dimensional Stabilization Network became the defining moment of early human guardianship. Accord and Vorath ships working in perfect coordination. Scientists from previously hostile species collaborating on real-time adjustments. And at the center of it all, the human delegation, not commanding but connecting, not imposing solutions but fostering their emergence. When the network successfully contained the dimensional rift and began the process of gradually sealing it, the celebration that erupted on the Accord station transcended species boundaries. Even the Stability Consortium acknowledged that the crisis had been resolved more effectively than previous dimensional incursions under Seldoran oversight. 1 standard year after assuming the role of guardian species, humanity hosted a galactic symposium on what they called adaptive governance principles. Representatives from all Accord species attended, including a large delegation from the newly admitted Vorath Cooperative. The Grand Hall had been transformed for the occasion, its usually formal arrangement replaced with interconnected discussion clusters designed to facilitate cross-species dialogue. As Ambassador Okonkwo opened the proceedings, he reflected on the journey thus far. When we first proposed that humanity serve as the guardian species, many of you, quite reasonably, questioned our qualifications. We lacked the Seldorans' perfect logic, their millennia of experience, their unifying consensus perspective. He paused, looking out at the assembled representatives, so diverse in biology, cognition, and culture, yet united in this moment of shared purpose. What we offered instead was not a perfect replacement, but a different approach entirely. The Seldorans maintained peace through impeccable arbitration. Humanity seeks to maintain it through imperfect collaboration. Where they provided answers, we provide processes. Where they offered certainty, we offer possibility. Marina stepped forward to continue. The past year has taught us that interstellar peace cannot be maintained through static systems. No matter how perfectly designed, the universe is inherently dynamic, constantly presenting new challenges that no single species, not even the remarkable Seldorans, could anticipate. Dr. Mehta added, "What we've begun to build together is not a fixed peace, but a living one. an ecosystem of relationships that adapts to changing conditions through the very diversity that once seemed like an obstacle to unity. As the symposium progressed, something remarkable emerged. Species that had maintained rigid diplomatic protocols for millennia began to engage more directly, sharing not just official positions but perspectives, concerns, and even hopes. The human guardians had created a space where diversity of thought was not just tolerated, but valued as essential to collective resilience. "I find myself experiencing an unexpected cognitive state," confessed Representative Tulk of the Hive Concordance during one particularly animated discussion. "What you would call optimism. Our consensus algorithms had calculated a 73.6% probability of a cord collapse following Seldoran extinction. We must now recalibrate to account for unpredicted adaptability." Even Ambassador Zixnathi, once their most vocal critic, had become a thoughtful partner in the new guardianship model. "The Valerian Confederacy has existed for 9,000 years, through careful preservation of tradition," she noted. "Yet I now recognize that preservation without adaptation leads to fossilization, not stability." Not all challenges had been resolved. Of course, several territorial disputes remained in delicate negotiation. The dimensional rift, though contained, continued to require monitoring. The Vorath integration process faced occasional setbacks as ancient habits reasserted themselves, and a minority of species still questioned whether human guardianship could provide the long-term stability the Accord required. But as Ambassador Okonkwo observed in his closing address to the symposium, these ongoing challenges were not failures of the new system, but essential features of it. "Perfect solutions create the illusion of permanent resolution," he told the assembled representatives. "But the universe does not respect permanence. What we are building together is not a finished structure, but a process of continuous rebuilding, less like a crystal and more like a living organism, constantly renewing itself in response to changing conditions." He gestured toward the Seldoran crystal, which now stood at the center of the transformed Grand Hall, no longer on a pedestal, but within a collaborative workspace where representatives from all species could gather around it. The Seldorans were remarkable guardians who maintained peace for 12,000 years. We honor their achievement and mourn their loss. But perhaps their greatest gift to us was not their perfect guardianship, but its imperfect ending. The opportunity it gave us to discover that the strength of our interstellar community lies not in flawless systems, but in our collective capacity to adapt, to learn, and to grow together. As the symposium concluded and representatives prepared to return to their homeworlds, Marina found herself standing with Dr. Mehta and Ambassador Okonkwo in the observation dome, looking out at the vast galactic spiral visible from the Accord station. "Do you think it will last?" she asked quietly. "This new approach we've started?" Dr. Mehta considered the question thoughtfully. "Nothing lasts forever, not even the Seldoran system, which seemed perfect for millennia until it wasn't." "But that's not really what you're asking, is it?" added Ambassador Okonkwo, his eyes still on the galaxy beyond. "You're asking if we've made the right choice, if humanity was right to step into this role." Marina nodded. "The responsibility is enormous. We're shaping the future of 273 species, trillions of individual beings. And that's precisely why it had to be us," said Okonkwo with quiet conviction. "Not because we're the best qualified or the most advanced, but because our entire history has been a lesson in the dangers of certainty and the value of doubt. The Seldorans failed because they couldn't question their own perfection," agreed Dr. Mehta. "Humanity will succeed, for as long as success is possible, precisely because we never stop questioning ourselves." As they stood together, watching distant stars and thinking of the countless worlds and beings whose futures were now intertwined with their own, Marina found herself experiencing an emotion that seemed particularly human and yet universally understandable. A blend of humility before the enormity of their task and determination to meet it with everything they had to offer. "We won't be perfect guardians," she said softly, echoing Ambassador Okonkwo's words from the investiture ceremony. "But we'll be persistent ones." Outside the observation dome, the business of the Accord continued. Species that had once regarded each other with suspicion, now working together on challenges they could never have solved alone. The humans had not created perfection, but they had created possibility. And in a universe of constant change and infinite diversity, perhaps that was the greatest achievement possible. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in the perfect calligraphy of a single hand, but in the diverse scripts of many, creating together a narrative more complex, more challenging, and ultimately more resilient than any that had come before. The human age of guardianship had begun, and whatever the future held, whatever crises or discoveries or transformations awaited, they would face it as they had faced every challenge in their tumultuous history, imperfectly, adaptively, together. The Seldorans were gone. Long live the Guardians.